Welcome to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. Ray's Talk Show is the home for conversation on politics and current events that are impacting our lives and what we can do about it. In doing so, we also like to provide you a Latino perspective to these debates. 58 million Americans, including the over 3.5 million U.S. citizens on the island of Puerto Rico, have something to say, and we don't hear it nearly enough. Thank you again so much for joining us. You can subscribe to Ray's Talk Show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, or anywhere you can find a podcast, or find us at rayspodcast.com or Ray's Podcast on Twitter. And email us at podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And we do this, of course, with a heavy heart because what's happening to our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico, the ongoing crises and recovery efforts on the island of Puerto Rico and the country of Mexico. And we'll definitely discuss that in a moment. Later on in the show, you're going to hear my take on President Trump's latest attacks on successful and socially conscious African Americans, the state of play in the ongoing fight to protect the Affordable Care Act. And shortly, you're going to hear from Marlene Peralta, who's going to give us her take on the DACA fight and the latest in New York City politics. Get a little local flavor to the show. But again, first, a few words on Puerto Rico and Mexico. On a personal level, it doesn't get much more closer to home as a Puerto Rican that still has a significant amount of close family members, titis, tios, cousins, grandfather, many other extended relatives on the island, throughout the island, and having such a close and wonderful relationship with the Mexican and Mexican-American community. And of course, all of our thoughts and prayers are with everyone, even those recovering still in Texas and Florida from those natural disasters. We can't forget about those efforts are we're not over that. That's going to take some time to recover. And so on a very personal level, this has been a very difficult, several days, still not knowing, having heard from a couple of relatives in the interior of the island, Orocovis. We've heard from pretty much everyone else, but hoping to hear from the last of the known family members that we have not been able to connect with. So there's a personal anxiety to this whole situation, a feeling of powerlessness because of the challenges of its, not being able to just get on a plane, or feeling like, even though I want to, and maybe I will, but, not being there and not knowing, not being able to kind of put your hands on it directly. And I've, as many of you are, I've been part of the charitable efforts to provide resources for the island, but, just a sense of powerlessness, not knowing, and imagining what your relatives are going through, not only day to day, just to survive, with scarcity of water, scarcity of food, scarcity of communication, scarcity of potentially of housing, but also that sense of hopelessness, not being able to communicate with your family and your loved ones, just to let them know you're alive. And so this is the kind of, this is the framework in which we're living our lives as Puerto Ricans or people that had family in that part of Mexico. This sense of tragedy, sense of loss, this sense of hopelessness. And, to give people a sense of the enormity of the impact of this particular, of these back-to-back Hurricane Irma and Maria, or Jose, on our community, you have to understand that, of course, the tragedies that took place in Texas and Florida, and the tragedies of the recent earthquake in Mexico, actually a few earthquakes in Mexico, those impact regions, those impact pieces of countries, significant regions, but nevertheless a portion and a relatively, a fraction of a nation in the case of, in particular, the earthquakes in Mexico. And so while all Mexicans, all people that care about the Mexican community are concerned and feel that sense of tragedy, and it hits close to home, you have to understand, because of the geography of the island, it being a relatively small island, only 100 by 30 miles, and the fact that the last hurricane literally hit impacted the entire island. So this idea that this is truly a natural disaster that impacted an entire ethnic group, not only every single person living on the island, but essentially every Puerto Rican around the world that has family and some sort of connection to the island of Puerto Rico. So this is something that is impacting literally virtually every single Puerto Rican living in this world is in some way impacted this, and this collective sense of fear, of hopelessness, of sadness, of tragedy, of hope, of powerlessness, of doubt. It impacts every single one of us in a way that almost nothing else could. And so I wanted to share that with people because to understand the scope of this for the Puerto Rican community. And I think that's why you have seen such an incredible outcry. And we'll talk about the political piece in a second of our community raising up and coming together. On the political end of it, there's a few things. One is that I think it seems generally from the, again, limited information, limited communication that's coming out from people that are victims of this tragedy on the island, that the governor, generally speaking, and the government of Puerto Rico, generally seen has been doing a good job with the limited resources that they can. Now, there's been some interesting reporting around and speculation about why, before Hurricane Irma, why some of the electricity went out before the hurricane hit. And that speaks to the larger question around sort of the hedge funds and Wall Street basically controlling the island and having this humongous inflated debt hanging over the island's budget and fiscal lives. So we were in the midst of dealing with that economic tragedy. There's the context of that speculation, but generally speaking, it's perceived from reports you can see that they're doing a good job. Now on sort of the federal response, we do know that there is a federal response, but there's been an increasing ringing alarm of, and there's a Washington Post article today that released that members of Congress, including the 4 Puerto Rican Democrats in the U.S. Congress, and elected officials like Senator Murphy out of Connecticut and others that have significant Puerto Rican, Senator Rubio, that have significant Puerto Rican populations in their states, are calling on the federal government to act quicker. And so there's speculation around, well, why aren't there more resources coming? Why aren't they coming faster? Why is there more cooperation with the airline industry to get victims off of the island and get more resources into the island? Why is the Jones Act preventing foreign aid from getting to the island, which is an act that is so antiquated and has hurt the economy and the quality of life of the island of Puerto Rico for decades and decades? Why aren't things moving faster? And is it because of its colonial status? Is it because of these antiquated laws, or is it just the fact that it's not that important to this government, federal government? Why is this moving faster? And so there's a context there, difficult to analyze on the fly, especially since we have very limited information about what's happening on the island and what's indeed coming to the island at what pace. But it's clear more could be done, and it's clear that we have to remind our elected officials, remind our neighbors and friends that this is the island of Puerto Rico. Everyone on that island virtually is a U.S. citizen. And this community has fought in wars for this country, including my grandfathers in Korea and World War II, respectively. Many relatives still fighting, servicing us in the U.S. military, and just from Justice Sotomayor to Lin-Manuel Miranda, a community that has provided a tremendous amount to this country and deserves the same sort of response that any other American should deserve, and including, by the way, the U.S. Virgin Islands. I would put in that category as well. So we want to make sure that we're holding the line on that. I must say that on a positive note, I have not been prouder. Probably have been prouder about being more Puerto Rican in my entire life than these last few days, in that particularly the diaspora has just been the organizing going on from coast to coast in Puerto Rican communities around the country and around the world to create this rapid response to address the basic needs of getting water, food, and other resources to the island. My Philly Puerto Rican community in particular has just done a yeoman's job, and I there's a Facebook Live video that you can see on my website, rayspodcast.com, where I get into this in more detail. But communities from Rochester, New York, Miami, Florida, Newark, New Jersey, Chicago have come together in an unprecedented manner of unity, leadership, organization, philanthropy, and love, extending to get valuable resources to our community, our beloved relatives on the island. So in the midst of this, and that doesn't even speak to the incredible humanity and the incredible strength that the Puerto Rican people on the island have displayed through this process. It has truly been an incredible time it has truly been an incredible experience to see how our people have come together, and that people have come together to support Mexico, to support Texas, to support Florida. It is a bigger story about humanity and the power of humanity and us coming together. And again, if you want more of my comments related to that, check out our video, our Facebook Live video that is being shown at rayspodcast.com. And finally, on the island of Puerto Rico issue in Mexico, we need to call all our members of Congress, regardless if you're a blue state, red state, you need to tell them they need to exert more pressure on the federal government to provide more resources to FEMA in a faster manner. FEMA has yet to ask for more resources, which to me is a very bad sign. If they think they have it covered, that means they're not putting the kind of resources that it's going to take to not only just make sure that we don't lose people to starvation and malnutrition in the coming days and weeks on the island and heat exhaustion, but to begin this process of rebuilding the island. As someone's saying, as a meme is going around on the internet, Puerto Rico's not destroyed, it's just closed for temporary renovations. And again, you're listening to Ray's Talk Show. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, you can listen to all of you can check out all the previous episodes. This is episode 259 of Ray's Talk Show. You can check out our podcast on iTunes, anywhere you can download a podcast, and just or check us out at Ray's RAYS podcast.com. On to the NFL. So in the latest Trump nonsense. So for those, I'm sure they saw, President Trump tweeted and has had an back and forth attack in a speech in Alabama and tweet storm over the weekend, basically attacking Colin Kaepernick and any essentially any African Americans that are in any way protesting via silent protest, nonviolent protest before NFL football games during the national anthem. And in the middle of that, also disinvited the Golden State Warriors to the White House, and basically he's been in attack mode. Jamel Hill over, the attacks over threatening her firing, and there's just been an ongoing saga with the president and essentially attacking successful and socially conscious African Americans. And it's very clear that what President Trump is doing is twofold. One is he is distracting he creates these distractions when the heat is on him. The heat is on him every day, more and more with Russia. Paul Manafort is getting squeezed more and more every day and likely will be indicted in the coming days. That doesn't even go on who I think probably is the most on him is Flynn. Let's not speak about the fact that this is the most incompetent, do-nothing administration in history that I can remember. The Republicans control the Senate, the Congress, the White House, and they can't get anything done. And we'll talk later in the show about the Affordable Care Act, the fight to save that, and we're still dealing with that issue. But they can get nothing done under this man's leadership. He continues to shoot himself in the foot, and he continues to show a total incompetence as it relates to management, politics, policy, and leadership. And so to distract us from those obvious dynamics, he attacks people that he can manipulate to, in a way, people that feel very disengaged with society, disengaged with this country right now, disaffected. and he presents to them an alternate, a boogeyman of people like successful and socially conscious African Americans, visible, that he can point to say to attack them, so that these folks who don't feel personally successful, don't feel like this is the America that, I don't know, they feel like they're owed something, and they feel that in particular these high profile successful African Americans, they're buying into this nonsense that they're crybabies, that they're privileged, that they're in some way not appreciative of this country, and that they're the problem, not the total incompetence of this administration, not the continued money that we're blowing by these needless occupancies in the Middle East. Afghanistan's never going to be a good actor. So I don't care what you do there. I remember the 70s in Russia couldn't figure out how to deal with Afghanistan. What do you think? What do you think we're going to be able to do there? Nothing, but waste money and lie and the quality of life of our soldiers out there. They don't want you focusing on that, so they pick on these high-profile targets that, for whatever reason, there's a part of his base that gets riled up and gets triggered by their sentiments. So this is about an incompetent that's finding distractions, finding high-profile distractions that'll get headlines, that'll solicit more reaction from celebrity, that'll solicit more conversation for talk radio and cable news, when in the reality is, the bigger story is why these people in Alabama would hoot and holler over essentially racial epithets, and the demeaning of people like Senator John McCain, a war hero who's battling for his life with brain cancer. So the other thing I'd like to say on this issue related to peaceful protests during national anthems is I think we have a fundamental, by the folks that, and look, I respect Alejandro Villanueva and I respect others that have a legitimate concern or preference that people don't do it during the national anthem because of what that flag means to them. But I think they have I would say this, I think many people on that side of the debate have a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of the military. The role of the military is to protect us from foreign attacks. In order, not for their purposes, not for their sustainability, but to protect our way of life. And our way of life here is centered around freedom of speech, and as a capitalistic society, freedom to make money. And to threaten people to lose their livelihoods over a disagreement on their rights to free speech is fundamentally un-American. Military is not a force to keep people in their place. Military is not a force to protect one particular vision of America, or to be an instrument for the president to exert fear. That's what it is in Russia. That's what it is has been in been in places like China and other nations that we look down upon for their civil rights and their democratic track records or undemocratic track records. It's actually the opposite. The purpose of our military is to protect us from those things. So when we think about this issue, let's really take an honest assessment of what you think is you want to get protected. We are not here to be kept in our place by the military or even by the police. The role of the police and law enforcement is to protect us, not to keep us in our place. And if that's what you think, then you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what our country is about. Let's listen now to Marlene Peralta. I had a conversation with her last few days ago. Her thoughts as a communications specialist out of New York that's in the intersection of politics, advocacy, and the ongoing immigrant rights movement and the ongoing debate around the future of DACA recipients in this country. Let's listen to Marlene's take on where we're at with the DACA debate. And also, she's going to give us an update on some New York City politics. We had a recent election, primary election in New York City that's had some interesting ramifications for New York City, New Yorkers, and particularly Latino politics. So let's listen to Marlene, and I'll be back with the state of play of the Affordable Care Act.
We have on the line with us, so happy to have a great friend to the show and really happy to have her back, communications strategist Marlene Peralta. Marlene, welcome back. It's been too long.
Thank you for having me again, and yes, it's been long enough.
Marlene, before we get into, there was a very interesting and important elections in New York City this week that I wanted you to catch us up on. But first, just wanted to get your take on especially as a communication strategist as you are, the last even 24 hours has been dizzying with a supposed deal that your senior Senator Schumer and Minority Leader Pelosi cut with the president, another New Yorker, last night, and there's back and forth with what that means. You're engaged with the immigrant rights movement. You actually spent some time at the United We Dream offices today, and of course DACA students and in the Latino activist scene in New York City. So just help us get some clarity. We're very confused here, Marlene. What's your take on where we're at here with the DACA debate and what's happening in Washington?
Well, I think we all are on the same page. We still have no clarity, like you said, on what exactly that deal is. All we know is what, it's been said in the media that, there's been negotiations and that the president is willing. It's already cut a deal with Schumer and Pelosi, but the Dreamers themselves have not been on the table. So we don't know exactly what that deal is, right? And it's weird that you're going to come into an agreement on something that it's affecting millions of people that are not even involved in what exactly, this is going to be. So, yeah, we don't have any details. I'm sure we're going to see what those details are in the coming days. But hopefully it's something good, right? We are glad that the president is, I guess, it's finally agreeing on doing something to benefit these young students who have been here since they were children, going to school, working, and even buying homes, starting businesses. So they really deserve a chance to have some kind of legal path in this country.
I'm glad you brought that up, Marlene, because I think it was Cristobal Alex, our friend from the Latino Victory Fund, that I first saw on social media a few days ago, or even it was late last night, the idea that, how can you be cutting a deal or discussing a deal that impacts, directly nearly 1 million young people and, millions of others through their family network without them being engaged. And I mean, from one of the things I've been surprised about how bad a deal maker this man seems to be. I mean, he was supposed to be a titan of industry, and he just seems to be such a poor manager as well as negotiator. He seems to have kind of given into the Democrats fairly quickly again in the last week with the debt ceiling agreement and everything else. So, as best you can tell, I mean, are you confident that we actually can get some deals done, even with the Democrats, and actually, he could be kept to his word to finish the job on some of this?
I think yes. I think we do have a chance that, these young people have been, talking to the local elected officials about what they really need. It's not like, these senators don't know, exactly what the Dreamers need, right? So I'm confident that they're going to agree on something that, that's going to be feasible for these millions of people. And also you got to think that Trump, since the beginning, have said that he likes Dreamers. So I'm hoping that this is actually true. And if you remember when it was announced that DACA had been terminated, Trump did not make the announcement himself because he knew that he was going to get a huge backlash, and that's something that he's being really careful, right, to try to keep his word around giving some sort of legal path to Dreamers. So hopefully this is something that he's really, willing to do, and I'm confident the Democrats are going to, be able to negotiate something real this time. Let's see if actually a Republican government can get something better than what the Obama administration was able to do.
Sort of the irony of the whole thing, right? So we'll
the irony, exactly.
Keep an eye on that. Marlene, the last piece on immigration is you're in touch. Obviously, you can't be a New Yorker without being very involved and understanding intimately the immigrant experience. I know you're in touch with a very strong network of immigrant rights activists, dreamers, DACA recipients, people that are engaged in service work related to immigrant community issues. So, just what's the temperature of the people you're talking to engaged in this issue? They've moved this issue so far. In that, how much did it take to get President Obama to finally create an executive order? That was an incredible accomplishment of itself several years ago. So, just where's your network at this point with this whole situation?
Well, I think since we were expecting like DACA and all of these anti-immigrant policies with this new administration, everybody was ready to fight or to continue the fight. So, everybody's hopeful that, we're going to get something, but, we'll see. We'll see. We don't have enough details to see where things are headed, but just knowing that the president is willing to cut a deal on DACA makes everybody hopeful and gives them ammunition to continue the fight to protect all immigrants, because we got to remember that DACA recipients are just a fraction of immigrants who are trying to get or are fighting to get a legal status in this country.
And I will again call out, especially our listeners listening to Ray's talk show today with Marlene Peralta, is that if you're not the people that need to raise their voice the most over the coming days and weeks around this issue are the non-dreamers, the non-immigrants. It doesn't matter what your legal status is. You have to be concerned for these young people on a moral level, on the economic level. They bring a great economic benefit to our country. And, we need to stand up for them. They've done enough as far as I'm concerned. I know they'll continue to push, but we need to all stand up together as one, because one day it's DACA recipients, another day it's young people getting caught up in the web of mass incarceration. Another day it's people getting caught up in the scourge of the opioid crisis. We have to stand as one. Marlene, I wanted to get your take on New York City politics, which is a particular area of expertise you have. We had the municipal primaries on Tuesday, so we essentially the city elections, because whoever wins traditionally, particularly in Democratic primaries in New York City politics, will win in November. So we had, the whole municipal slate on the ballot, from the mayor down to city council. First to the mayor, Mayor de Blasio won very easily. None of the other potential stronger contenders decided to jump in, the South Stringers and others. And so he won pretty handily on Tuesday. It's hard to tell. From our perspective as outside the city, he seems very popular. He seems like he's getting some things done. Obviously, the pre-K funding and paid sick leave and some other very strong on the sanctuary city element of his work related to protecting immigrants in New York. Marlene, is he as popular as he seems from the outside? And what's your expectations for the next term for Mayor de Blasio?
I don't know about popular. I don't know if that's the right word to label him. He's certainly in a very significant position as the mayor of New York City, right? Because New York City's always been at the forefront of, the legislative influence nationwide. And de Blasio himself has been trying to get a more, national profile. He just announced today his commitment to reduce carbon emissions on private buildings, and he gave the exclusive to the Washington Post, right? So that's kind of the tricks he's doing to try to get some national attention. But he's a progressive, right? He's a leftist mayor in this Republican super extreme White House right now. So he's in a very tough position, and I don't think popularity for him is going to be easy in that kind of scenario. And yes, as expected, he won the primaries, and it's pretty much a given that he's going to be the mayor for the next 4 years, since the candidates against him are not, household names or people with billions of dollars like Mayor Bloomberg. So, the next 4 years, I think he's going to be really, I guess the grassroots movement is going to pressure him a lot on affordable houses, and that's one of the main issues driving New Yorkers to the ballots lately because of, the lack of affordable housing. We have historic numbers of people in shelters in New York City, and many do not feel like he's done enough to tackle that issue. I mean, yes, he's creating affordable housing, but he's not targeting those people at risk of ending in homeless shelters. He is targeting middle-class New Yorkers who are live in New York because, yes, New York is getting expensive for everybody. So yes, that's going to be, I think, part of what's going to be his challenge in the next 4 years. And as you mentioned, yes, we need to give him credit for policies that can have or do have national prominence, which is the universal pre-K, which is something that everybody's happy about, and this is a major policy that he pushed since he started, his first term. He's done also a lot on trying to get minimum wage to be raised, because he understands that, you can't do anything if people are not earning enough to stay in New York City. But yeah, affordable housing, I think, will be the main issue in the next 4 years, since his plan is to create and preserve 200,000 units of affordable housing in 10 years. So the first 4 years were the beginning of that initiative.
Marlene, what else could he be doing? Because I sense this hesitancy or to downplay his perceived popularity, especially outside the city, by activists and in town. So what's the piece we're missing here? What could he be doing that you think would engender him more to working families, minority communities? So what else are we missing here in this story?
I think the problem with him is more of how he's selling what he's doing, right? Because people don't understand still the magnitude of the policies that he's passed. Like, Juan Gonzalez said it the other day. He just wrote a book about Bill de Blasio and how he's part of these national progressive movement. What it means for working families, what, the impact of universal pre-K is, right? Like, we're saving money by, putting our children in school a year earlier than expected, right? That's something that I'm a mom, right? And I had to pay daycare when my child was 4 years old, right? But now this is free for everybody, no matter the income. So this is huge. And we pay at least $10,000 a year in childcare. So that's $10,000 that people are saving, right? So the messaging around what he's doing is not getting out there. And I think that's why in the media and overall, he's not getting all the props that he deserves. Yes, his administration is not, it's not perfect. There's still a lot of things he needs to be working on, but I think within his administration, they're not doing a really good job advertising, the impact of this progressive administration for the first time in 20 years, because we came out of 20 years of conservative or Republican and an independent mayor. So, we've seen a lot of changes in such a short time.
Yeah, and I also know that amongst the activist class in particular, there had been some criticisms early on in the administration of a lack of diversity or not having as many, particularly Latino appointees as people had expected. I think it seems like he's made a bit of a comeback on that with people like Grace Bonilla and others. But I know that's something that hiring piece is something that the activist community also keeps an eye on. Hey, listen to Marlene Peralta, communication strategist out of New York City, very well known in the New York market as well as nationally, and someone we turn to for her political acumen and strategic thinking around these issues. Again, and thank you for listening to Ray's Talk Show. Marlene, the city council races, I mean, there was lots of them, obviously, dozens of them, dozens and dozens. A lot of interesting sort of, particularly in the Latino areas, sort of Latino political street fights. I think more incumbents won than maybe we thought. We thought maybe there'd be one or two more other upsets. But what should people know about, I mean, there was lots of races, but what should people know, do you think, that was interesting to take from the city council results on Tuesday?
Yeah, well, like you said, a lot of incumbents won, but I think the major impact on the city council elections this year is the fact that we're losing women at the city council level, right? And because of term limits, like the speaker of the city council, for example, Melissa Margarito, is out of the city council. Some of the seats that were available were held by women, and now they're replaced by men. So that's going to have a big impact, right? Because some of the policies that we saw these past 4 years, benefited women. And not having enough women, it's gonna impact, the policies that benefit us in New York City. So I think that was that's kind of like the main impact these elections were having. Also, some of the more noticeable races had to do with Hispanics or Hispanic districts, like in Jackson Heights, where it's, a lot of South Americans, Dominicans. One of the spots that was vacant was a Dominican woman, Julissa Ferreras, announced that she was going to leave city council. So we had Francisco Moya, who is a state assemblyman, fighting for that seat against Kiran Montserrat, who it's been in a lot of scandals in the last, 5 years around domestic violence, right? Charges against, his I guess his girlfriend or wife, and then he was accused of stealing city money, right, when he was an elected official. So Francisco Moya won, and that was one of the closely watched races this time around. Then we have in the Bronx another woman that was term limited, Puerto Rican woman in the Bronx, and now the Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr., who was a state senator, won that spot. So there were two really, popular races that everybody was wondering what would happen, and now we know.
And let me give our audience some context. So Ruben Diaz Sr., when he was a state senator, was the man that brought Ted Cruz to the Bronx. So it gives people a sense of this man is a lightning rod figure. There's no question about that.
Yes, he's very popular, very well known, very conservative. He's a reverend, right? So that tells you what kind of inclinations he has. So the Bronx, particularly, it's been electing a lot of Latino conservatives. So that's gonna have a very interesting dynamic now at the city council level, which is majority progressive. But we will see. As long as it benefits the community, I don't really care. But Diaz Senior, it's known to be anti-abortion, a lot of things that affect women. So we will watch it even closely. These next 4 years at the city council.
Yeah, no, I'm on a personal level, I'm really glad that Carlos Moya won Montserrat. Is a total disaster, that guy. I know many of us were breathing a sigh of relief that he did not get into city council. Marlene, the last New York political cheeseman I wanted to get your take on is I was reading something the other day that our outgoing city council president, Melissa Margarito, is potentially considering a run for Congress. Congressman Jose Serrano, who has the traditional Latino Bronx seat, is considering retirement. He's in his early 70s. The potential other candidates, it's a pretty strong field, Mike. Blake, there's a couple other strong candidates that potentially she'd be running against. So just any thoughts? Do you think that could happen? And what's your thoughts about the outgoing council president's political future?
Well, I've been hearing that gossip since I was, I think, a City Hall reporter a few years ago, right? Because we were wondering, okay, after she's out of the city council, what can she do, right? So the spot at Congress was kind of one of the alternatives. I think it's early to know, and I don't know how popular she is in the Bronx to be able to get that seat. Because remember when she won, in the city council district, which covers Harlem in Upper Manhattan and parts of the Bronx, she won by a really low margin. So I don't know, what her future will bring, but that should be an interesting race if it actually happens.
That is interesting. Yeah, no. So people don't know the geography. The core of that seat really is in East Harlem, which is referred to as Spanish Harlem, and the small part of the district she had in the Bronx, that was not her strong suit, that's for sure. So, being a Bronx seat, she would have to really, and then have to really deal more politically with the Bronx machine. Some of the characters you were just talking about would make for some really, really interesting politics.
Yes, and she's a progressive, and the Bronx again is being electing conservative. Democrats, yes, but more on the
that's right.
On the conservative side. So I don't know,
especially on social issues that she's very progressive on, that she's most known for. So, Marlene, thank you so much for your time today. Let people know where they can find you on social media and anything else you wanted to share with our Ray's Talk Show listeners.
Thank you for having me, and I work for a firm called Progressive Cities, so you can find us at progressivecities.com. I usually work on campaigns that, affect low-income people, affordable housing, immigration, environmental justice. So I'm trying to fight the fight, right? That's what's good about this job, that it's trying to make an impact on the people who really need it.
Marlene, you're one of the best in the business, and we hope and pray, and we're going to keep supporting our DACA students, because hopefully we can get DACA passed in the next few weeks. And next time you come to the show, we can talk about more fun topics, like Cardi B and A-Rod and J-Lo, things that make us laugh and smile.
I know.
The serious stuff. Marlene, mil gracias. Thank you so much.
Gracias. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marlene. Always great to check out one of our, I know Cardi B is number one on the charts, but Marlene Peralta is one of our top Dominicanas that we go to. So before Cardi B, there was a lot of strong Dominicanas from New York that were holding it down. But much respect to Cardi, number one on the charts. So the Trinity Dominicana from the BX doing her thing. But anyway, thank you, Marlene. And I wanted to give people a quick update on where we're at with the trying to kill Zombiecare. The latest attempt to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, which has provided 20 million Americans access to health care, including 6 million Latinos and over 500,000 Latino children. The latest attempt is the so-called Graham-Cassidy Senate bill, which would basically strip up to 30 million people of health care. 20 million wasn't enough. We're up to 30 million now, and essentially take away the mandates on pre-existing conditions, by giving the Medicaid money to the states in the form of block grants, and they would essentially have free reign on what they would want to do with that money. They could formulate this to go chintzy on poor people. They could do it in a way that denies more people access to quality health care, and they could simply just write a letter to Secretary Tom Price from HHS saying, we just don't, without justification or reasoning, we just don't want to be required to cover people with pre-existing conditions anymore. So the latest is that the good news, as of we're taping on this Monday evening, is that Senators McCain, probably the most valiantly, Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, and Senator Susan Collins, I believe in the last few hours, has publicly gone out against this bill. And because of parliamentary rules, they only have till Saturday night to pass something with only 50 votes. So essentially, if those three stay on the line, we're in good shape. I don't trust Senator Paul, so I'm assuming if there was a vote, he would actually vote for it. So it is critical to me that we have to continue to push Senator Murkowski from Alaska, who was one of the three votes against the last repeal and replace bill a few weeks ago. And the lady and people like Senator Portman, some of those that are getting pressure from the governor, are getting pressure from advocates in the state, and, have never seemed really comfortable with this legislation. So we have to continue to vote and publicly do all we can this week to kill the bill, because, again, they only have till this weekend. And for those that are wondering, why is this even in play? If this bill's so crappy, why would they even consider this bill? Well, we could argue about the morality of these people, but the bottom line is that they're pushing it because their donors, their ultra-rich donors on the Republican side, are pushing them to get Zombiecare passed, not because they think it would be better health care for this country. I mean, we don't have a CBO score, but, I mean, by every account, it's the worst of all the previous proposals. It's not because they think it would be better for the country or provide people better health care. And it's not even because they want to save money because of the debt that we have, which is not an insignificant thing, the deficit of this country. It's just because they want to be able to save more money so they can justify larger tax cuts to the ultra wealthy. Not the little guy, not middle class people, not even upper middle class people. The ultra wealthy, the top 0.1% of our country, they want larger tax cuts. And to be able to justify that, they need to save money somewhere else. So when you hear about the upcoming budget debates and tax reform debates that are happening in Congress, the House is already passing spending bills, and we're very concerned about the anti-poverty programs that are being cut. We're going to talk a lot more about that in the coming weeks on Ray's Talk Show. But understand why even Zombiecare is on the table. It's not because of any honest belief that this would provide better, more efficient health care for this country. President Trump doesn't even know what's in this bill. Many of the senators promoting it don't quite know. Look at the sad performance of Senator Cassidy of Louisiana. Jimmy Kimmel, a late night comedian, wiping him off the floor with this debate and this messaging over the last few days, when Jimmy Kimmel is showing more leadership in health, in a national top policy issue, federal policy issue in this country like healthcare, that we're in trouble. So you have to continue to fight. If you're in Arizona, thank McCain, offer to shine his shoes, send him some tamales. Thank that man for standing in the way of this potential atrocity to this country. Talk about a health crisis. And we got to keep pushing, until these folks, until they're officially short 50 votes. Don't trust Paul to do the right thing. They're trying to bribe Senators Collins and Murkowski at any turn. If you know anyone in Alaska, have them speak up. It is very important. And I encourage all of you to continue speaking up about Puerto Rico, Mexico, the Affordable Care Act. Speak up on behalf of democracy, freedom of speech. Stand with Cap. And continue to stand up for the America that we grew up to know and love, because we understand the true values of this country and what has always made America great. Thank you so much for joining us on Ray's Talk Show. Again, you can download, subscribe anywhere: iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify. Thank you so much, our Spotify audience. Thank you so much. And anywhere you can download a podcast or just take us out to RaysPodcast.com. Email us at podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. Is my son Troy. Troy, say goodbye to everybody. Bye. All right, bye. Is my Troy, my wonderful oldest son Troy, comes down to spend a little time with his daddy. Thank you again so much. You can email us at podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. Continue to resist. Continue to speak up for yourselves, because that's ultimately what's going to get us through the coming days and months. And para la gente de México y Puerto Rico y the Virgin Islands, the people still dealing with the aftermath of storms in Texas and Florida, estamos aquí contigo. We're here for you. We care about you. We love you. We're praying for you. And God bless you all. Good night.